Hello comrades, this is the Finnish Bolshevik. In this video I'm gonna be looking at what I would call a liberal critique or social democrat critique of the Marxist labor theory of value. This is from a blog called Social Democracy 21st Century, so it already sounds like, what a bunch of useless liberals. But this is maybe more worthwhile because it's not like outright like idiotic, absolute like drooling ANCAP or like some kind of like brain dead anti-communist propaganda. No, this is like a little bit more subtle and a little bit more intelligent. All the points are still wrong and all that, but it's a bit more clever. So I think this might be more persuasive to people. So that's why I think this is more worthwhile to respond to. So this post is called Why Marxist Labor Theory of Value is Wrong in a Nutshell. And they've got 7 points that they make and a bunch of more information on each point. So it says, the labor theory of value as presented in part 1 of volume 1 of Capital is wrong for the following reasons. And then the first reason. 1. The a priori argument for the labor theory of value in volume 1 of Marxist Capital is a non sequitur and later contradicts itself as detailed, and then there's links to where it supposedly contradicts itself. So let's look at these information they give. And this post is called A Devastating Contradiction in Marxist Argument for the Labor Theory of Value. Devastating contradiction. Well, let's see exactly how devastating this is. So this is from volume 1 of Das Kapital. It says, quote, but the exchange of commodities is evidently an act characterized by a total abstraction from use value. Exchange of commodities is an act characterized by total abstraction from use value. Exchange is a total abstraction of use value. Alright? Then they point to another part where it says, however, this is blatantly and disastrously contradicted later in the same chapter when Marx makes this admission. Quote, lastly, nothing can have value without being an object of utility. If the thing is useless, so is the labor contained in it. The labor does not count as labor and therefore creates no value. Do you see what they did there? This is what they have to say about this. They say, on the one hand, we can totally ignore use value in ultimately explaining exchange values, but on the other hand, only a few pages later, nothing without utility can create value and by implication price. This is a bad contradiction and requires that being an object of utility is necessary condition not only for having labor value, but also an exchange value. Now, this is a strange point, because on the one hand it's kind of clever how they came up with this, but on the other hand it's so incredibly stupid that I can't believe these people are serious. What does Marx say? Marx says, exchange of commodities is an act characterized by the abstraction from use value. Whereas in a different part in the same chapter he says that a thing must have utility, otherwise it's not worth anything. Where is the contradiction? There's no contradiction. Like, this is incredibly basic. When Marx says nothing has value without utility, he means that nobody would buy a product that they don't need or want. Use value being how much people need / want something, kind of like demand. On the other hand, he says that exchange is the elimination or abstraction, whatever, of use value. By this he means that products in commodity production are not made for use but to be sold. In commodity production, the producer is making things to be sold, not for his personal use. The seller is interested in the exchange value, the consumer is interested in the use value. And, this is kind of like why I don't think these people are actually serious. Like, they can't possibly think this, because Marx explains this in such great detail that these people, they must be already predisposed against him, so they ignore all the points he makes and then they just find one thing they can nitpick to attack him. In feudalism, for instance, products such as crops or food and clothes were mostly produced by the peasants for their own use, by themselves. They want furniture, okay, they chop down some trees, they make furniture for themselves. They want clothes, okay, they get some, animal skin or something, I don't know, and they make it into clothes for themselves. They want food, okay, they grow food. Green stuff sprouts out of the ground, they eat that for themselves, That's what sometimes Marx and Lenin would call patriarchal or natural economy. patriarchal, having nothing to do with gender relations. You know, pre-capitalistic, self-sufficient farming, basically. There's no exchange in that. All there is use value. They make the thing for themselves because they need it and they want it. Commodity production is totally different. In commodity production, you know, as capitalism developed more and more, this is like when we're transitioning from feudalism to capitalism and markets are starting to develop. Producers, they will start to make products for the market. Like they will start to sell their food, especially the excess food. And then the more excess there is, the more money you have. You can hire more employees, you get more excess, you can sell more of that, you get more money, and then you know, suddenly there's capitalists. Big farmers become more and more capitalist. In commodity production, they don't produce for personal use or use value, but to be sold for exchange value, as in use value is totally abstracted from this. It's just for exchange. They make it so they can sell it. They're not planning to use it. This in no way, I repeat, in no way contradicts the obvious fact that the product or commodity, whatever it is, must have some use. Of course, it must be at least somewhat appealing to the consumer due to its utility, otherwise nobody would buy it. And even in that quote that they bring up, like, Marx talks about useful labor, because only this kind of labor that is useful produces something that has utility. Only that kind of labor counts, because if you make a commodity that's absolutely useless, nobody is going to buy it. So Marx talks about useful labor all the time, and that is an improvement over Adam Smith, for example. Adam Smith's labor theory value. So that's point number one, right? So number two, Marx faces the problem of reducing all heterogeneous human labor to a homogeneous, abstract, socially necessary labor time unit, but does not properly explain how this happens. Now, this is kind of just a vague statement. They don't provide much evidence to support this. They just claim that Marx doesn't do that. In reality, Marx explains this in incredible detail. That's like what the whole beginning of the book is about, explaining how this happens. This is weird because they're like, oh, Marx was so dumb, but like, at the time, most other economists also had labor theories of value, or they simply, you know, accepted somebody else's labor theory of value. It was universally accepted back then. Yet now suddenly these, like, so-called social democrats, whatever, have a hard time grasping this. Like, I don't believe it. I don't buy it. This is not really a point at all. They just make a claim and don't justify it. 3. Even if Marx could overcome points 1 and 2, he faces the problem of defining labor value in cases of joint production where it is possible that the labor value of a commodity might be undefined, nil, or negative. No, he doesn't. Like, what are you fucking talking about? Are you high? Like, this point is particularly absurd. Like, not only does labor theory of value work perfectly well, Marx constantly, absolutely constantly stresses the collectivity of labor. What have you people been reading? The collective aspect of labor. You know, Marx was a communist, you know that, right? Workers collectively working. Marx, haven't you heard the thing about capitalism being its own gravedigger? Marx constantly says how capitalism is made production entirely collective, but it hasn't made political power or distribution of the profits collective. And that is why Marx says that the mode of production, that is capitalism, is in contradiction with the productive forces and the way of making things. Because the labor is entirely collective, but the distribution of the profits, the money, is not. There's a contradiction, which can only be solved in a, you know, if we make the distribution also collective. Not only that, but the collective aspect of labor is even a core aspect of Adam Smith, Marx's predecessor, if you will. So, they basically claim that it's like impossible to calculate the value if the production is collective, but it's not. It's like these people don't seem to have any idea of what Marx means because they think there is such work as not joint production. Basically, all labor is joint production. And like, what kind of labor are they talking about where it's impossible to, let's see, what does they say, like, labor value of a commodity might be undefined, nil, or negative. How could it be negative? What do you mean? Like, do you understand what labor value means? If you have more people working on it, that doesn't make it decrease, that makes it increase. It can't be negative. Or nil. What the hell does that even mean? Undefined? No. If you have more labor, even like in form of more people working on a thing, what happens? The value goes up because there's more labor in it. With more labor in it, more labor value. There must be like some kind of miscommunication here because this doesn't make any sense. Point number 4 is interesting. 4. There's no reason why free human wage labor should have a special power that animals, slaves, or machines do not have, as I point out here, and then there's a link. Well, alright, here's the thing. I don't exactly remember this for 100% certain, but I'm pretty sure that Marx never talks about slaves in America. He's talking about historical slavery. He's talking about slave society, and then he's saying how now we have capitalism where instead of slavery there's free wage labor, like, you know, free as in you're not a slave, you're a wage slave, but not a literal slave. Law of value is something that applies to capitalism, not ancient society. And because slavery was a pre-capitalist form of production, you know, that's why he says that it's not applicable here. Animals, alright? Why animals don't make value? Have you ever seen an animal sell a product? I repeat, are you high? Law of value applies in capitalism, not in pre-capitalism. And like, what kind of a mode of production do animals have? That's pre-capitalism if I ever saw pre-capitalism. That's like pre-everything. Animals don't have... no. No. Just no. Alright? Machines. They say there's no reason why free human wage labor should have a special power that machines do not. Well, alright. That's wrong for a number of reasons. I don't know exactly what they mean by machines. I'm guessing they mean robots. But, like, okay, if they mean robots, then it's like, woo, Marx was so dumb because he didn't take robots into account in, like, the 1870s. What a crushing critique of Marxism, right? If you have a robot or some kind of automaton, some kind of machine that works without a worker, if you have that thing making you products and then you sell them, then yeah, sure, fine. I don't see an obvious reason why that would not be the case, but it's just kind of a stupid point because obviously there weren't robots in Marx's day. Second of all, if they just mean machines in general, it's like when Marx was talking about machines and he says machines can't make value, it's like a machine needs a human to operate it. At least in Marx's day it meant that. And also, machines do make value, but only as tools used by humans. Point number 5. Modern fiat money refutes Marx's theory of money and also his labor theory of value, since money must be a produced commodity in Marx's theory, but has long since ceased to be, as I point out. Then there's links. Now again, this is wrong. This is just dumb. Like, Marx never argued that money must be a measure of value, quite the opposite. He says that if money is just created willy-nilly, arbitrarily even, then of course it's not an accurate measure of value. Of course not. But when has Marx even said that money must be a measure of value? How can they not understand this? This is so basic, like, once again. I'm not a, great Marxist economist, but I can grasp this just fine. Like, Marx doesn't think that money and price and value are the same exact thing. Why else would we talk about value, exchange value, and price? Why not just talk about price? Like, this is a critique that Marxists make of bourgeois economics, idealist, non-materialist economics. Bourgeois economics, like subjective value people, they are the ones who say that money is an accurate representation of value. They say that values are subjective, they have no material basis, people just have desires, and then those desires are reflected in how much they're willing to pay for something. That is idealism. The objective world doesn't matter, it's just all like in your head. The desires in your mind change the value of things existing in the real world. No, the real world is not changed by whatever happens in your mind. The real world value of something is objective regardless of your perception of it. That is what Marxists say. It is bourgeois economics that teaches that value is subjective. Marxists often criticize neoliberal bourgeois economics, and we Marxists say that money price is like relatively irrelevant. You can get somebody to pay almost anything for anything. It takes a certain amount of labor to produce, I don't know, a hamburger. The value of that hamburger is measured by how much labor it takes to make it, according to Marxism. But according to bourgeois economics, the value of that hamburger basically changes based on how hungry you are, or how much you want that hamburger, which is an incredibly simplistic, idealist, and kind of ridiculous way to look at it. Whereas in Marxism, your personal desires are merely the utility. If you're not hungry, then hamburger has no use. If you're extremely hungry, then it's very, very useful to you. This argument just entirely misses the point of Marxism. Number 6, the empirical reality is that prices are not set by means of the abstract socially necessary labor time of commodities or of money as a produced commodity. Interesting thing about this, like, they have, for all these ridiculous random arguments, they have links, but for this one, the only one where a link would be really good, they have none. They just say empirical reality is this, and then they present no evidence to support this. No. They say empirical reality is that prices are not set by means of abstract socially necessary labor time. You need to prove that. You can't just claim that and then be like, oh, you know, wrecked, refuted, trounced. No. This is both wrong and a mischaracterization. Prices are obviously impacted by the law of supply and demand, as Marx pointed out, and as Marx knew this, that prices, not value, but prices, are impacted by a law of supply and demand. In fact, he said that things are almost always sold either above or under their actual value. Money price doesn't correspond to their value. However, if supply was to be perfectly met, if supply was to perfectly meet demand and not exceed it at all, let's say we have 100 products, 100 customers who each want one product. Supply and demand are at an absolute equilibrium. I mean, this never really happens, but let's say for the sake of argument that this happens. In such a situation, supply and demand lose all their explaining power. They can't explain anything. Because you can't say, oh, this is more expensive now because there's scarcity, or that it's cheaper now because there's abundance. If there's an absolute equilibrium, demand perfectly matches with supply, then it doesn't explain anything anymore. Still, somehow there's a price. Where does it come from? Labor theory of value. It comes from cost, raw materials, machines, and most importantly of all, labor. This only applies if we're not talking about an absolute monopoly, though, because of course in a monopoly weirdness happens. There's not even really a market in monopoly, like a normal market. Depends, but you know, whatever. Let's not even get into that. Regardless, this point is wrong. Last one, point number 7. The problem is that surplus labor value, if that concept could even be adequately defended, shut up, would not really explain money profits, since money profits can exist in a slave-based economy and very probably even in an economy where machines did most of the work. Surplus labor value would not really explain money profits, since money profits can exist in slave-based economy. That is a mistake in logic. That is a fallacy, like a non sequitur. They're saying that since money profits can exist in slavery, therefore labor theory of value cannot explain profits in capitalism. That makes no sense. Of course it can. Like, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? Are they making this as a semantics argument? Because they're saying that since they're talking about money profits. There's no such thing, like there's no profits in capitalism are not the same as profits in slavery. Money profits in slavery, like under capitalism? Because again, Marx is talking about pre-capitalist slavery. I wish they were more precise in their language and in their explanation of things, so I could know. I mean, it would be wrong regardless, but I would just like to know in what way it was wrong. Just, you know, to be absolutely clear, like, let's talk about surplus value for a bit, okay? According to Marxism, the capitalist, he employs people, proletarians, and let's say the proletarian makes a thing that's worth 10 value, and then he gets paid in money, and let's say the money is roughly equivalent to, let's say, 5 value. Labor is a commodity, so it's sold on the market, but let's say that it's roughly equivalent to the same amount of money as you could get from 5 value. So he performs 10 value worth of labor, but he only gets paid the money for 5 value. This is all obscured by the fact that he gets money, he doesn't get the product he makes, and similarly the capitalist doesn't get money, but he gets a product, and he only gets money after he has sold the product. But imagine like the worker, he earns like $5 for his work, making a $10 table or something. The capitalist sells the table, he gets $10. So he has made $5 profit. A more specific term would be surplus value. He has made 5 surplus value. Now you could, of course, like to be accurate, you would have to add to that costs to using tools or machines and raw materials, so you could deduct that. So let's say he paid like $2 for the cost of raw materials and tools and implements. So he makes like 3 profit. That is basically surplus value. How does labor theory of value not explain that? They say that labor theory of value does not explain it because you can even have money profits in slavery. But I don't really understand what they mean. This, like, I'm trying to like think this in my head, like, in what way does that make sense? How do I have to think about this so that it makes sense in their favor? Because it just doesn't make sense. The labor theory of value explains this perfectly well, and I understand what slavery has to do with this. Like, let's say this is in the context of capitalist slavery. You don't pay them any wages, you just give them food so they don't starve. But it works the same way. I don't understand how it doesn't work, according to these people. And if it's pre-capitalist slavery, as, you know, is actually what Marx is talking about, even in that case, like, surplus value doesn't exist in pre-capitalism simply because the law of value doesn't exist in pre-capitalism. The law of value applies to capitalism. Like, they have multiple points which rely on this false premise that you can just use the law of value for non-capitalist modes of production. Like, I'm surprised they don't say, like, oh, this is wrong because the law of value doesn't do this or that in full communism. Because, like, of course, the law of value doesn't exist in full communism. I don't know, like, every single one of these points was wrong, and some kind of a distortion, misunderstanding, misrepresentation, or mischaracterization of what Marx actually meant. The first one was maybe the most clever, but it essentially just relies on semantics, and that the people reading this, like, I'm guessing liberals, probably don't understand Marxist economics. Only one that was partially correct was point number 4, where it possibly talks about robots. Even that's dumb, because of course there weren't robots when Marx wrote this. Point number 2 is not really even an argument, it's just a claim with no evidence. So yeah, not a very good rebuttal of Marxism. Anyway, that was my rebuttal to why Marxist labor theory of value is wrong by a bunch of liberals. Please stop being liberals. Please stop being social democrats. Please reread your Marx and become a proper socialist, a proper communist.
In the parks after dark by candlelight, getting spied on by